Hi, everybody. We're here from La Cuenta talking with Bill Ong Hing. Bill, thank you for talking with us. Can you introduce yourself and say who you are?
Sure, thank you for the invitation. My name is Bill Hing. I'm a law professor at the University of San Francisco, and I also have a joint appointment with the Migration Studies Master's Program at USF.
Thanks. And yeah, really just grateful for your time. And our hope is to just kind of ask you some bread and butter legal questions given the extreme situations that we're in right now. So, Alix, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for being with us. We are so grateful that you've been part of La Cuenta before and that you are here with us. It's definitely a very difficult time for immigrants right now. And we have a lot of questions. There's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of fear, which I think is the main purpose of everything that's happening right now to have people scared and paranoid and all of those things. So I feel that knowledge is the most powerful thing that we can have. And we have a couple of questions that we would like to ask you. And the first one that I have is we've been trying to distribute red cards with you know your rights. Um and it has all the instructions of what to do in case you are stopped by ice, but for what I seen in that car, it seems more that it's more for when they find you at your house. And my question is, what would happen if you are stopped by ice in the street or at the store, somewhere else
Mhm.
where you don't have the luxury to keep the door closed? And um, what is the right way to approach them if they come to you?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. You're right. The Know Your Rights presentations that are generally given are for the home or for the workplace. And a lot of people don't talk about a street encounter. But the first thing to remember, the best possible way, if you can, is to be calm. Uh, because once you start running, that can provide the ICE officer some cause to grab and arrest you. So you want to remain calm. But even on the street or in the grocery store, you have a right to remain silent. You do not have to say anything to somebody who comes up to you. If you want, you can ask for identification, but not much more than that, to be honest with you. So you don't have to say anything. If you think it's an ICE agent, you can hand them the red card if you have one, but you don't have to have a red card on you either. You can say that I don't want to talk. I know I have a right to remain silent. Um, and if you can say it in Spanish or in Chinese, you do not have to, you don't even have to say anything. Okay. You can just be calm and quiet. The only time that you might have to do or say something is if they have a federal warrant with your name on it, and it has to say federal district court on top. Even then, you still have a right to remain silent, even if you're presented with something that has your name on it. So you have to remain calm. And the idea is if they have no information on you, if they have no evidence that you are not born in the United States, they cannot detain you.
Okay. Yeah, because that's what it's the scarier part, right? That it seems that now is that they're racial profiling people and is stopping them and getting them, which is the biggest lie that it's happening right now, that everybody was excited about this because he said we're gonna go after the criminals. But the truth is they are not arresting only criminals, they're arresting people like me, people who look a certain way. And I think it's very important for me to ask this question. I believe that once they see that you have the knowledge of what's happening and you understand your constitutional rights regardless of your status, that can be helpful. But if it doesn't work out and they still take you, what does the process look like?
Okay. So if they still take you, again, let me give you two scenarios. If they take you and they still do not have information on you, you still should remain silent. You can ask to call a friend or a family member or an attorney, and they are supposed to provide you with that right if they do not have any information on you. Okay. Um, if they search you without permission and they find evidence, or if they have evidence in advance that you were not born here. For example, many Mexicans carry a matricula with them. It's a document that's issued by the Mexican consul. We actually advise people to not carry that with them because
Okay.
that's evidence that they were not born here. And once they have evidence that you were not born here, they can start deportation proceedings. Okay. Now, if they racially profiled you and then they got that document, an attorney could argue that the document should not be introduced, that it should be suppressed as a violation of the Fourth Amendment. That argument only works in a certain part of the country. It actually only works in the western part of the United States in what's called the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And so I know I'm getting too technical, but racial
Can you say why
profile,
that is? Like why it only
yes,
in certain parts?
yeah, because the only court really, with maybe one other exception that, but I don't want to go there because it's not clear. But the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals is the federal court of appeals over certain western states: California, Oregon, Washington, Arizona, Nevada, um, I think Idaho, Hawaii. They ruled many years ago that racial profiling by ICE is an egregious misconduct. It's an egregious violation of the Fourth Amendment. And therefore, any evidence obtained as a result of that egregious violation cannot be introduced at hearing. Okay. The rest of the country, if it's just they pick you out of the line at Starbucks because you're Latino, that kind of racial profiling in the rest of the country, that argument does not work. They can search you, get the information, and prove that you are not born here, and they can win the deportation hearing. Okay. The only other thing that works in the rest of the country is if they get physical, if they start shoving you around, if they don't let you go to the bathroom for 12 hours, if they don't feed you for 12 hours. In other words, if they start treating you badly, that the rest of the country, that's what it takes to be egregious misconduct. And um, so, so that's part of the answer to your question. And again, if here's another bad thing, if your children told somebody that you were born in Venezuela or El Salvador, and that information got to ICE, that information can be used. That's not an egregious misconduct. And so that's why we don't call them Know Your Rights presentations, but we do presentations to children at schools too, um, to talk to them about keeping certain family information private and the importance of that type of thing. And so anyway, the rest of your question is that then if they start deportation proceedings, they have to start it right away if you're in if you're in detention. And at that point, they introduce evidence, either your own admission or what documents they might have that you were not born here. And then it's up to you to prove that you're here legally. And if you can't do that, you will lose. One thing that we do tell people to carry around with them in California anyway is a California driver's license because
I was just about to ask you about that.
yeah, in California anybody can get an AB60 a
Yeah.
license and that is not evidence that you were not born here because there are many U.S. citizens that also have that driver's license. And I know some immigrant rights attorneys and paralegals, excuse me, who also have applied for that kind of driver's license in solidarity with the
Mhm.
undocumented community. So, in other words, it's just not evidence that somebody was not born here.
Can I ask, so I hesitate to go down a theoretical conversation, but
Mhm.
to your point of the advice that you give to children and to determining if someone was born in another country, it's not illegal to be born in another country, and we have many citizens who were not born in the United States. And so I guess I'm just wondering, why is that evidence that someone might be deemed deportable?
It's under the law. There's a section of the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 291, and it says that it talks about the burden of proof in removal proceedings, and that the government satisfies its initial burden by evidence that you were not born here. So you're right. I mean, there's citizens. And then, as I said, the burden shifts to you to prove that you're here legally. So if hypothetically, if it was a US citizen and they, for some stupid reason, started proceedings, you would then introduce evidence of your birth certificate or your passport uh, to prove that you're a citizen. And so in theory, you would win. Uh, the government has deported citizens before, not quite in the scenario that I described to you, but sometimes people are coerced into signing a waiver of their right to a hearing. And so there have been citizens who panicked and signed that waiver, and then they got deported, okay, without a hearing. And there's a news article on this that I can send you, but there was a gentleman in Los Angeles who that's what happened to him. He was mentally slow, and he was born in Fresno or Merced or someplace like that. But he had a California driver's license. This was more than 12 years ago. He had one before the AB60 driver. He had a valid California driver's license to prove that he was a citizen, and they didn't believe him. And he signed a waiver, and he was deported. And so some attorneys represented the family, and they sued the ICE, and they I think they could have won a lot of money if they'd gone to trial, but the parents settled for $800,000. And um, but I mean, the sad part is that they didn't find their son until 3 months in Mexico later. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, that's why I think it was actually worth a lot more than $800,000. But so they do make mistakes. That's not the only time that they've deported U.S. citizens.
Okay. I have a question about, I haven't found this information anywhere. And I think it depends in what city it can happen. It might be a different condition for each city. I have no idea. But where does it usually ICE take you? Is it a facility? Is it a jail? Where can people find?
Yeah, that's a real good question. Let me begin by answering the question this way, that there's a rapid response network throughout the Bay Area, throughout Southern California. There's telephone numbers, depending on what county you live in, that you can call, and there are volunteers from community organizations that if there's been an arrest, they try to verify that it was ICE first, because there's a lot of unverified calls that come into rapid response. Uh, if they verify that it was ICE that arrested, then they immediately call an attorney who's on call at one of the legal aid offices, and then they try to intervene and find the guy, find the person. It could be a woman. And so in the Bay Area, they take them to a particular place. It's an ICE office. It's in downtown San Francisco, 630 Sansom Street. In Southern California, they take them first to an ICE office for processing. But the problem is, and this has been true since after the election, okay, since after November, they've been moving people very quickly. So attorneys try to go to that place or call on their behalf to file a representative form to say that I'm representing this person, to stop the person from being transferred. Um, and if they're lucky, they're transferred. But it's usually, to answer your question, they first go to an ICE facility, then they can be transferred anywhere. Um, and I this just happened to me on Monday. Um, I was on call, and a woman. It wasn't an arrest. A woman had lost her hearing. Her private attorney lost her case, and so she was told to go in on Tuesday morning at 7:30 to report to ICE. Um, and she was worried that she was going to be deported. And so we had advised her, yeah, you're going to probably be taken into custody, but maybe they'll let you stay here until your kids finish the school year because they're like 6 and 7 years old, kind of thing. And one of them is sick and has an appointment at Stanford Hospital. Uh, and so we helped her. We didn't represent her. We helped her fill out this request for a stay until the end of the school year. And so another attorney, so she went in at 7:30 with volunteer from the community, and sure enough, she was taken into custody. And another volunteer attorney was down on Sansom Street by 8:30 or 9. By then, she was on an airplane to Georgia with her kids.
It happens
Okay,
that quickly.
it happened that quickly. So
But
they can move very quickly right now, and they're moving faster than I've ever seen them before.
Is it specifically to stop legal support? Is that why those moves are?
That's a very good question. I believe so. I believe that one of the reasons they're acting so quickly, especially in a place like the Bay Area or Los Angeles, is because they know that there are networks of volunteer attorneys, and they want to make it as hard as possible to represent them. Now, that woman, she doesn't really have a defense, because she already lost her case. She's from Guatemala, um, and but other people who they have a right to a hearing before that. She already had her hearing. That's when you want to intervene, but you might have to end up representing them in Florence, Arizona, or in in Pennsylvania or Texas. They're opening new family detention centers again in Texas. And one of my colleagues at the law school just emailed me last night saying that she is aware of an Afghan lawful permanent resident who was arrested at the airport. I don't know what airport he flew into. Probably Southern California. And then he got detained, and he's at a detention center in Bakersfield, actually in McFarland,
Mm.
Kern County. Uh, and we don't know why he was detained because he has a green card, but he is from Afghanistan. So we don't know why he's detained.
So I'm going to ask a couple, I'm just going to kind of rattle off some related questions here. So I'm imagining, I know I have a loved one who's been detained, and rapid response is trying as quickly as they can. But maybe some questions to think about is if I have a family member or a friend, what kinds of costs should I anticipate in terms of trying to protect them? If they require medication that they didn't have with them at the time that they're detained, is there a way to get that to them? What happens to their children? What happens to their car? So kind of like, like real
Yeah.
logistical kinds of questions here.
Yeah, on the medical thing, yeah, you want to be able to go to ICE, uh, and even if they're not there anymore, plead with them about the medication and that type of thing. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Uh, and ICE is not known for providing good health care and medication, that kind of thing. And so uh, it can end up disastrous for somebody who needs medication. In terms of what happened to their children, so the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, if you go to their website at ilrc.org, ilrc.org, they have, and you Google, or you don't even have to go to the website, just Google ILRC Family Preparedness Plan. Okay. And it's in Spanish and English on their website. And unfortunately, this is sad, but at our Know Your Rights presentations now, and even in our individual consultations, people ask the same question that you just asked, Antero. And we say, you here on this form, it explains how to do a temporary guardianship. It explains to you how to list all your assets, like your truck, your bank accounts, and and to select somebody who's trustworthy that you can turn that information over to. Um, this is not in that family preparedness plan, but I sometimes tell people that they should keep a notebook at home, for their children, that if they come home from school and they're not home, to go to the notebook, of emergency phone numbers to call, that who to call and who to give the notebook to, and that kind of thing with that information.
What a horrible notebook to have. It's
Absolutely. Yeah. Right.
I have a question. I don't know if this is a there is an answer for this, but I'm wondering, in the case that you were mentioning earlier, she had a hearing and unfortunately she was denied. Um, but what happens for somebody who doesn't have a criminal record, who has been paying taxes, who has been doing everything correctly? Is the process a little bit different? And if they don't have a warrant signed by a judge,
Mhm.
they just find you and then you were not lucky enough to be detained. Do you think the process would be a little bit different?
Well, okay, so here's let me give you the hypothetical, and we're seeing a lot of these folks at almost every other week. We're doing free immigration consultations. My students and me, and other people do it as well. At after Catholic Mass, uh, like in San Mateo 2 weeks ago, we had over 90 people come after Catholic Mass that lined up, and my 20 students and I answered immigration questions. We're doing another one um, that I would rather not say online right now, but I can talk to you about it afterwards if you want to come watch, because we're only advertising it to members of the church, that if it's a church that we're invited to, just to keep it within the church membership. Did the same thing in San Rafael about a month ago. And so a lot of people are coming to us and saying, you know, I've lived here for many, many years and I have US citizen children. I'm undocumented. I haven't had a crime. Like, what happens if I get arrested by ICE and they know that I'm undocumented? Okay, if somehow they find that out. Um, if they could still be taken into detention. Okay. Um, I, prior to the new Trump administration, I would have very confidently said, no, they're not going to take you in detention if you didn't have any criminal problem and you've lived for 20 years. I can't say that with confidence anymore. You know, the only thing I do know is that they don't have the capacity they do not have unlimited detention capacity. Yes, they're trying to get more money to open more detention centers and to pay more to private prison companies to open more and to make partnerships with sheriffs in certain counties to open up their jails and be paid to have. So yeah, they're doing their best to increase detention capacity. I still do not believe that they have detention capacity to deport 1 million people in 1 year. They do not have that, but they do have some detention space, and so it is possible that even somebody who's undocumented, who never had a crime and has children and is working, it is possible that they'll be taken into detention. But if they're not taken into detention, either case, they have a right to a hearing, and people should not waive their right to a hearing. And
mm,
if you've lived here for more than 10 years, you can apply for a relief called cancellation of removal. It requires that you've lived here for 10 years, that you're a person of good moral character, meaning no criminal problems. The third requirement is the hardest, that you have to show very extreme and unusual hardship on your children or your spouse if they are legal. Okay. If you have children or a spouse that are legal, you have to introduce evidence that there's very, very strong hardship that they would be, if you were deported, that they would suffer. And the the good news is that you can apply for that relief. The bad news is that the level of hardship has to be very, very extreme. If you have healthy children who do great in school and play soccer, you're going to lose. Okay. If you have a child dying of who's suffering from cancer, then you have a chance. Okay. If you have a child who has a learning disability, probably not good enough. Separation alone is not good enough. I had this conversation. This is pre-pandemic, actually. I was invited to speak at a conference at Stanford Hospital at the medical school, where I met and had befriended, and I've stayed in touch with many pediatricians in the Bay Area, both from Stanford and at UCSF, and they could not believe what I just said. They could not believe that separation alone is not enough hardship. And since then, I mean, Fernando Mendoza, who's a pediatrician at Stanford, Raul uh, Rodriguez, and another colleague here at UCSF, I'm forgetting her name. Um, they have written affidavits and they've signed statements saying separation alone should be enough hardship. And we're trying to get that issue because they're introduced me to things called ACEs studies, adverse childhood effect studies, to prove that separation alone has long-lasting physiological, not just psychological damage. And I'm digressing, but the point is that even if you have lived here for 10 years and you have US citizen children, it may not be enough to win your immigration hearing, and you still might get deported.
So, Bill, thank you. And yeah, I'll down below are links to all of the things you've been talking about. But when we last talked, yeah, we talked a little bit about those ACEs costs,
Yeah,
particular to those traumas as they kind of overlap across generations. And so, first of all, thank you for your time. I'm wondering, in maybe a sentence or two, is there anything in this moment that's giving you hope around this topic? Are there spaces that you're finding hopeful?
well, so far I have confidence in the courts that, and I'm talking about the federal courts, not so much the immigration judges, to be honest with you, but in the federal courts, that the kinds of things that I mentioned, like racial profiling, that making sure people have a right to a hearing, making sure that children have access to attorneys, that ACLU and other organizations like that are doing a great job of blocking some of the stuff, even some of the stuff that's happening at the border, um, and and immigration rights attorneys, including those attorneys that work for me at our immigration clinic at USF and at Catholic Charities and Legal Services for Children and La Raza Central Legal. Those attorneys, we're all trying our hardest to make sure that we can slow things down and get things into the courts and file appeals and that kind of stuff. So beyond that, I don't have that much hope. I'm disappointed that Democratic leaders are not speaking up on behalf of migrants.
Yeah.
They're beginning to speak up on behalf of tariffs and people, federal employees being fired, but I want our leaders to speak up on behalf of non-citizens and migrants because
Yeah.
they shouldn't be treated like this. So I'm hoping for that.
Bill, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.